When discussing live rock, let's start with the basics. What is it? Live rock can be either human-made or naturally made. It's a highly porous rock, usually made of calcium carbonate. The rock itself is not alive, but once beneficial bacteria colonize both the exterior and deep inside, it becomes alive, thus aiding in the nitrogen cycle. I would say there are 4 primary functions of live rock, the first being the biological filtration. The second function of live rock is purely aesthetics. A completely empty tank just doesn't look very good. Hey, how are you guys? The third function of live rock is a place to put your corals. And the fourth function of live rock is really to provide a hiding place for fish. Live rock can get a little bit confusing because it can come in wet or dry. And really all that means is, does it arrive at your doorstep still wet, or does it arrive at your doorstep completely dry? The vast majority of commercially available rocks, and certainly all the ones at Marine Depot, are dry live rock. What are we going to be using in the innovative Marine Encore build? We're going to be using the Carib Sea Life Rock. Just their base rock, which just comes in kind of standard shapes. We got way more than we needed, but that way we have some flexibility to create something really cool. Carib Sea Life Rock is man-made, but it's made from real aragonitic base rock. It comes in this cool coralline color that really mimics the reef well, and it is filled with all of this spored bacteria, which will help your aquarium cycle quicker once you add the salt water. Lastly, the question is, how much do you need? Now, a lot of this is obviously going to depend on your scaping preferences, but a good rule of thumb would be to get about 1 to 1.5 pounds per gallon of water. If your budget can afford it, I recommend getting a little bit more than you think you need, because it will give you flexibility. You can even break the larger pieces, you can saw them off, and you can just do a lot more and not have to worry about breaking a piece. There are a few different types of live rock. The most common type of rock you're going to find is called base rock or foundation rock. Just has general large rock shapes with a bunch of nooks and crannies. The next kind of rock is called branching rock. It basically comes in these long branches. The fourth kind of rock is called shelf rock. And just think of the flat horizontal surface of a shelf, and that's the rock. These pieces are really great for mounting corals, and oftentimes you will see them perched between 2 pieces of base rock. The last kind of rock is called rubble rock. Basically, when you get your live rock shipment, you're going to find a whole bunch of broken pieces at the bottom. Don't throw them away. These are really handy for hiding the seams and for creating little miniature islands in your tank. Oftentimes people ask the question, can you just pick up some rocks that you find on a hike or around the yard? And the answer is probably not. First, it's not going to be porous enough for all of that beneficial bacteria to colonize. And secondly, we don't know what sort of heavy metals are in that rock that could slowly leach out over time and harm your livestock. What rocks do we recommend? Well, anything you're going to find at Marine Depot is great, but my own personal favorites are either the Carib Sea Life Rock, Marco Rocks, or Real Reef Rock. Aquascaping, or scaping as hobbyists like to call it, is basically the process of putting rocks inside your tank in some sort of functional and aesthetic mixture. A stacked aquascape is definitely the most simple. All you do is you take your live rock and you just stack it on top of each other. The pros of this are, if you ever have to catch a sick fish or remove something, all you have to do is pull out the pieces one by one, the tank is empty, and then you can catch your fish. But the negative is it's not as stable as securing it. So you could have a snail or other livestock, like sea urchins, who could nudge the edges and topple your whole aquascape, possibly killing your fish, knocking your corals off. A secured aquascape is just the opposite, and you glue or cement the pieces together, basically making it into one solid structure. I have 2 favorite products I always use when I'm securing the pieces together.
The first is this stone fix from Aquaforest. What I like about it is all you have to do is add water and you can make really small batches. The second thing I constantly use is the Aqua Stick. It's by Two Little Fishies. I like the Coraline red color. And for any sort of small pieces, I like this Marine Depot extra thick super glue. It's really handy to attach especially small pieces of rubble rock or really tiny pieces that don't need a lot of support. There are two really good ways of breaking up your live rock. The first is literally to take it, drop it, and you get smaller pieces. So the second thing you can do is you can take a saw, a sawzall, a hacksaw, anything, and you can cut specific pieces that you want off of it. A chisel also works really well. I got 7 tips and tricks for you when you're doing aquascaping. The first is using a cardboard mock-up. What I like to do is just grab a couple pieces of cardboard, get some blue tape, measure the exact dimensions of the inside of your tank, and then just do a mock-up. Tip number 2 is the rule of third. And basically what you do is you take any sort of image, picture, video, aquascape, and you put 2 horizontal lines and 2 vertical lines. And the rule of third says an image is more visually striking if you put the subject or the centerpiece at the intersecting points of those lines rather than in the middle. Tip number 3 is something beginners don't often think about, but it's flow patterns. If you are to put your aquascape in such a way that your wave makers or your return nozzles have a bunch of dead areas, what's going to happen over time is you're going to notice food and poop gathering in certain areas, and it's going to be a pain because you're going to have to siphon it out. Number 4 is light penetration. This really depends on the kind of lights you buy. For example, if you're using the Kessel A80s like we're using in the Encore build, if you were to take a piece of rock like this, right, put it near the top of your scape, and the light is like right here, what would happen is it would light this portion really high with a lot of intensity, but it would cast shadows on all sides, meaning the bottom of your tank might not get enough light. Number 5 is pretty common sense, but it's a mistake that I made. You just need to make sure you leave enough room around the edges of your aquascape between the aquascape and the glass. Tip number 6 is hiding the seams. The purple epoxy automatically looks a little better, especially if you're using the Carib Sea life rock that we're using, but you can take an additional step. If you buy live rock, what you're going to find is there are going to be pieces of rubble, small pieces that have broken off from the bigger pieces. What I like to do is I like to take some of that Marine Depot super thick super glue or even the Two Little Fishies Aqua Stick Coraline Red epoxy, and I just put a layer on top of the seams, and then I take a bunch of pieces of rubble rock and I stick them on there. And finally, tip number 7 is stability and feet on your aquascape. If you were to just put it flat on the bottom of the glass, yes, that would be the most stable, but the problem is you have all of this surface area where there's no flow, where detritus could build up over time. So what I like to do is I like to build my aquascapes in such a way that I have small feet touching the bottom, leaving a minimal contact between the glass and the scape.
Live sand, it's primarily made of a mineral called aragonite. Aragonite is calcium carbonate, and it's basically the same material that coral skeletons are made of, as well as like snail shells. A question a lot of beginners ask is, do you need a sand bed for a successful reef tank? And you ready for the answer? No. No, you don't. A sand bed has 3 primary functions. The first is biofiltration. The second primary function is aesthetics, just because it looks nicer. The third function of a sand bed is to provide a home for your livestock. For example, there are different sand-sifting starfish, Nassarius snails, wrasses, gobies that rely on a sand bed either for hiding, for sleeping, or for feeding. There really are 2 types of sand beds, a shallow sand bed and a deep sand bed. I would consider a shallow sand bed anything 2 inches or under, and a shallow sand bed is my personal preference. A deep sand bed, let's say 4 to 6 inches in depth. Let's talk grain sizes. Really, when you're buying live sand, there are 3 grain sizes. The first is what we would call a sugar fine sand. This is typically anything from 0.25 to 1 millimeter. It would be something
similar to this. Very, very, very fine.
The second grain type is what's called special grade. This is 1 millimeter to 2 millimeters. The third and final grain size is coarse. Coarse is most typically crushed coral, and while this is not crushed coral here,
You get the idea. It has some very large pieces in it.
when it comes to colors, there really are 3 choices. The first choice is just white. The second choice is white with a little bit of pink moved in, and the third choice is black. I have 3 personal favorites. They all come from the Carib Sea Arig Alive brand. The Arig Alive comes pre-populated with beneficial bacteria, so you actually don't want to rinse it. Put it in your tank. It comes with a little clarifier pouch. In 24 hours, it will completely clear up. The first sand I would recommend is Fiji Pink. Its grain sizes are 0.5 to 1.5, so it's not quite as fine as that sugar fine, but not quite as coarse as the special grade. I've used this sand a ton, and it's actually the sand I'm going to use in the Innovative Marine Encore build. The second type is called special grade. This is my own personal favor right now because the grain size is slightly bigger, from 1 to 2 millimeters. It's big enough that I don't get any sort of sandstorms even when I turn the flow up to high. And my third and final recommendation is called Hawaiian Black. This has a broader mix of grain sizes from 0.25 to 3 millimeters. And if you want that kind of black lava look that you find in some of the Big Island beaches, then this is the sand for you.
So how much sand do you need? I would say that for a shallow sand bed, less than 2 inches, you probably want to pick up basically a pound of live sand for every 1.5 to 2 gallons of water. A very common question, especially for everybody who lives on one of the coasts, is can you use sand from the beach? And the answer is potentially yes, but there are 2 caveats. The first is, especially here in the United States, there are federal and local laws that may prohibit the taking of beach sand, so you need to do your research first and make sure it's allowed in your area. The second caveat is make sure that if you do find a source that is legal to harvest, that you choose a very clean portion of the beach. Even so, I would probably take that sand home and rinse it out several times before using it in your tank. But in my personal opinion, I would say, why risk it? You know, you can pick up for relatively cheap a 10 or 20 pound bag of the Arig Alive. You know it's sustainably sourced, you know it's legally sourced, and you know it's filled with millions, if not billions, of beneficial bacteria that will help cycle your tank more quickly. Lastly is how to maintain your sand bed, and there are 2 primary ways we do that. The first is through your water changes. Use one of the gravel vacuums and gently siphon out a lot of that detritus that will settle into your sand bed. The second way to maintain your sand bed is through a cleanup crew. There are various creatures out there that will help keep the sand bed both aerated and clean, such as sand-sifting starfish, wrasses, sand-sifting gobies, and various types of snails. If you hadn't had a chance yet to like this video, please do that now. And if you haven't yet subscribed to Marine Depot and My First Fish Tank, why not do that now? Coming up next week, everything you need to know about RODI systems, water chemistry, and salt mixes. As always, we'll see you next episode. Happy reefing, everybody.